A rule broken that no one announced. Rules rarely disappear with noise. They fade when someone dares to step beyond them without asking for permission. This story begins not with rebellion, but with a quiet deviation, one that went unnoticed at first, yet permanently altered what authority was allowed to do. This moment matters today because power is often constrained less by law than by habit. Systems follow rules long after their purpose has expired, not because they must, but because no one wants to be the first to cross the line. And for one sheik, that line was crossed without announcement, without explanation, and without applause. The rule in question was never written plainly. It lived in custom, in expectation, in the unspoken agreement that certain decisions required visible approval from the highest level. Even when delegation was possible, the rule preserved order, but it also preserved delay. Over time, it had become a bottleneck disguised as tradition. He noticed it during a routine review. A decision had stalled, not because it lacked merit, but because it was waiting to be seen, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for symbolic permission. The process functioned, but it moved slowly, constrained by deference rather than necessity. He did something unexpected. He allowed the decision proceed without intervening. No signature, no endorsement, no reminder of hierarchy. The system hesitated, then moved. At first, it felt like an exception, a one-time oversight. But as the outcome proved effective, something subtle shifted. People noticed not what he did, but what he did not do. The absence of correction became its own signal. The rule had been broken, not declared invalid, not challenged publicly, simply bypassed. That was a reveal. Authority had chosen not to assert itself where it was no longer needed. And in doing so, it questioned whether the rule had ever been necessary at all. Quietly, expectations adjusted. Decisions advanced without seeking symbolic validation. Responsibility redistributed itself naturally. The system did not collapse. It breathed. And in that unannounced break, a deeper question emerged. If one rule could dissolve without consequence, how many others existed only because no one had tested their relevance? That question would not remain contained for long, because once a rule is broken quietly, it invites others to listen closely for the sound of freedom. The shift spread carefully, almost cautiously. No one announced it. No memo explained it. Yet across the system, people began acting differently. Decisions that once climbed upward for symbolic approval now paused briefly, then moved forward. Responsibility, once deferred, was accepted. Not everyone welcomed the change. Some leaders felt exposed without the shield of endorsement. The unspoken rule had protected them from consequence as much as it slowed progress. Without it, judgment carried weight. Success and failure could no longer be attributed upward. Accountability settled closer to where decisions were made. The conflict surfaced when a more complex case followed. This time, the stakes were higher. The old habit pulled strongly. Advisors hesitated, unsure whether silence still meant permission or if intervention was finally expected. The absence of instruction created discomfort. They came to him quietly, asking without asking. Was the rule truly gone? He did not answer directly. Instead, he asked what the decision required. When they explained, he listened, then said nothing more. No approval, no rejection, just attention. The signal was clear to those willing to read it. Authority was present, but it would no longer substitute for judgment. The decision moved forward. It succeeded. That success changed everything. What had felt like an exception now felt like precedent. The rule, once enforced through expectation, began dissolving through disuse. People realized it had survived not because it was necessary, but because it was familiar. Still, tension remained. Some worried that boundaries were blurring. Others feared inconsistency. A few warned that quiet rule-breaking invited chaos if left undefined. The question grew unavoidable. When does flexibility become erosion? He understood the concern. Rules exist for a reason. Breaking them carelessly creates instability, but preserving them without purpose creates stagnation. The challenge was no longer about this rule alone. It was about whether the system could learn to distinguish guidance from habit. That distinction would soon be tested, because the next decision would fail. And when it did, everyone would want to know whether the rule had been broken wisely or too easily. The failure arrived quietly, without spectacle or outrage. A decision made without symbolic approval led to an outcome that fell short. Not disastrous, but enough to raise doubt. The old rule, long silent, suddenly felt remembered. Whispers followed. If approval had been given, some argued the mistake might have been avoided. Responsibility drifted upward again, searching for cover. The temptation to restore the rule surfaced quickly, framed as caution rather than retreat. Tradition, after all, offered safety through familiarity. This was the true conflict, not whether the rule had been broken, but whether accountability could survive without it. He resisted the urge to intervene. No correction was issued, no authority reclaimed. Instead, he asked for review, not of permission, but of reasoning. What assumptions failed? Where judgment faltered? What signals were missed? The conversation shifted from blame to learning. The absence of endorsement had not caused a failure. The absence of reflection had. That distinction mattered. As the review unfolded, something unexpected happened. Those involved did not deflect responsibility upward. They owned the mistake. They adjusted processes. They refined criteria for future decisions. The system corrected itself, not because it was ordered to, but because it had to. The rule, once thought necessary for protection, was revealed as a shortcut, a way to avoid judgment. The turning point came when another decision followed soon after. Similar stakes, similar complexity. This time, the team moved carefully. They consulted peers. They stress-tested assumptions. They did not seek permission, but they sought clarity. The outcome held. Confidence returned, not in authority, but in capability. People began understanding that the broken rule had never guaranteed success. It had only distributed responsibility upward, where it could disappear into silence. Without it, responsibility stayed visible. Still, the risk remained. Breaking a rule quietly works only if the system learns faster than it fails. And the final test was approaching, because someone would soon try to exploit the absence of the rule, not to take responsibility, but to avoid it. And how that attempt was handled would determine whether the quiet break became wisdom or weakness. The attempt came subtly. A leader pushed a risky decision forward, citing autonomy where judgment was thin. Without the old rule, they assumed distance meant protection. If the outcome failed, there would be no signature to trace, no authority to confront. Responsibility, they believed, could dissolve into silence. It did not. The decision was paused, not by decree, but by inquiry. Peers questioned the logic. Assumptions were challenged openly. The absence of symbolic approval did not remove scrutiny. It intensified it. Authority had not disappeared. It had changed form. That was the climax. The realization that breaking the rule had not weakened accountability. It had sharpened it. Without hierarchy to hide behind, judgment became visible. Risk could no longer masquerade as independence. Autonomy now demanded justification. The leader adjusted course, not out of fear of authority, but out of respect for consequence. The system had learned to regulate itself, not through enforcement, but through expectation. Rules once upheld by silence were replaced by standards upheld by clarity. The resolution settled quietly. The old rule did not return. No replacement was announced. Instead, a deeper discipline emerged. Decisions advanced with care. Responsibility stayed close to action. Authority remained present, but no longer needed to announce itself to be felt. Standing alone afterward, he reflected on what had changed. He had not broken a rule to assert power. He had broken it to return power to where it belonged. In doing so, he revealed that the strongest systems do not depend on permission. They depend on judgment. And judgment, once demanded, reshapes everything. A rule broken without announcement does not vanish. It evolves into something stronger, an expectation that those who act must also answer. That was the lesson left behind. Not rebellion, maturity. Subscribe to join the journey. A rule